The bridesmaids were supposed to throw confetti. Instead, they threw accusations. Emily Carter stood by the aisle with her dress clutched in her hands and a cluster of offended glances stabbing at her from 3 rows back. The chandelier above the hotel ballroom scattered light like judgment. The band kept playing because no one knew quite how to stop a song that had turned into a verdict. Someone had shoved a champagne flute full of whispered lies into the air, and it had broken on her name. She had promised herself on the night she left the foster home and counted the miles between her and anyone who called themselves better, that she would never, ever fall for the kind of man who saw people as investments. Never the ones with houses the size of small towns and hands that could buy an apology. No billionaires, she had said into a dented mug in the back of a thrift store kitchen, and the vow had felt righteous and small and honest. By 30 it had become almost a religion, dignity over glitter, independence over gilded cages. Now, at a wedding intended to humiliate her, she did something she had sworn she would never do. The original plan had been surgical humiliation. Derek Hawthorne, rich fiancé, smooth as polished stone, had a list of reasons lined up. He had practiced his look of disappointed decorum and chosen a friend to plant a rumor about Emily, an old boyfriend, a mistake, a picture taken out of context. Derek wanted to end the engagement by making sure the room saw the truth as he planned to tell it. He wanted to make her small before he walked away. But people don't always execute humiliation with the finesse they imagine. The rumor collided with the bride's fragile nerves. The bride's fragile nerves turned into a shriek. The shriek sent the florist's ladder toppling. A panicked guest knocked over a tray, a woman fainted and the officiant spluttered. It was a chain reaction of social explosives. Emily didn't wait to be reduced. She bolted toward the door because running sounded better than staying to be picked apart. She didn't have a plan. She had instincts, reflexes honed by a childhood where the exit was the only option. Her shoes scraped the hotel carpet, polished faces turned like gills snapping at the scent of scandal, and then someone grabbed her arm, not with intent to drag her back, but with friction enough to stop her. He was in uniform, a fluorescent vest with EMT stenciled across the back, a pair of hands that held steady as if they had learned to pull people out of panic more times than they could count. He looked like the last person you would expect to see at a high society wedding, which is precisely why Emily reached for him without thinking. He had the kind of face that read honest on the first try, the kind that invited confessions. "Are you okay?" he asked. His voice was low, uncomplicated, practiced in the softer modalities of humans who'd seen people on their worst days and decided to make space anyway. "Do I look okay?" Emily snapped, which was rhetorical and true. The man, James, he said, didn't laugh at her. He guided her toward the back exit with that careful patience reserved for strangers who might break if handled too quickly. Outside, the air smelled like impending rain and cigars from a group of men who thought the world ran on their calendars. Emily leaned against the brick and tried to breathe, fingers bruised by the bands of her wedding dress. She was going to tell everyone. A voice said from inside, and then the window fogged with gossip and Emily's hands shook. "You're not alone," James said. He moved like someone used to carrying weight that wasn't his to keep. "Come with me. Sit for a minute." She should have said no. She should have pushed him away and walked back into the chaos because that was how you controlled the narrative, by facing it head on. But Derek's glare had been a scalpel. The room had already confiscated her dignity and was beginning to hold it up like currency. The velvet-lined shame in that ballroom felt like a noose. So instead of logic, Emily chose self-preservation. She chose the man whose hands felt like a harbor. They ended up in a tiny diner around the corner where the neon sign hummed and nobody seemed to care what your mother had told you about your life plan. James ordered coffee, black. Emily ordered nothing because she was afraid of stirring the wrong thing inside herself. "Name?" she asked when the awkward silence became too large. "James Walton," he said, "but just James tonight." Walton was a small word that could have been anything. It could have been a last name. It could have been a misdirection. When she asked him why he was at the wedding, he told her a quiet thing. He was on call. An EMT team had been alerted for the fainting woman. Then everything else happened. He had stepped in to help because that was his job, and because sometimes the world needed a hand steady enough to hold a person while the world was falling. "That's noble," Emily said, automatic scorn tasting like copper on her tongue. She had built a wall against noble men. She had watched them buy apologies and package pity into charity events. "Not always," James admitted. He watched her without an ounce of the superiority that had poisoned so many past encounters. "Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes you keep people alive and they still decide to walk away." "Then why help?" she asked. "Because I can't not," he said. It was a simple answer, and its simplicity made it truer than a sermon. He left that line there, because sometimes simplicity was the only honesty left. She should have left after the coffee. She should have gone back and claimed whatever pieces of her life the room had not yet stomped on. But the world had sealed its verdict. An exit route is still an exit route when the door is a stranger's taxi. Something impulsive rose in her like a tide. She thought of promises made in thrift store kitchens and the iron of vows she kept like armor. She thought of a life of saying no to gilded cages and yes to a dignity that men couldn't purchase. "Get in the car," she told James. "Run." He didn't run. He opened the passenger door for her like a gentleman from a different century in a city that had forgotten how to be polite. She climbed in, and the taxi took them to the county clerk's office where the bureaucracy was mercifully blunt. Papers, stamps, a woman in a red cardigan who had seen more people married than the law had intended to track. Emily signed before the second cross-examination thunked into the room. James signed because his hands didn't flinch. The clerk, a neutral functionary in the machinery of legal fate, declared them husband and wife. They walked out with a marriage certificate burning a hole in James's wallet like a talisman or a trap. Emily felt a ping of disbelief. Vows in a county office have the same ink as vows in a cathedral. Their legal weight is indifferent to intention. She swallowed a laugh, a cough, and perhaps a little terror. They were married. For real. "If this sounds like the start of a rom-com, you can't pause, stick around," James said with a half-smile that wasn't a pitch but could have been one. The woman at his side did not smile. She held tight to the absurdity like an artifact. "I promised I would never fall for a billionaire," Emily told him as they locked the taxi doors, the words tumbling out like a confession. It was part vow, part dare. James glanced at her. "Then we'll have to test that promise together," he said. His tone was warm, not mocking. "But I make no guarantees." She stared at him for a long second. There was no obvious trace of the kind of man she had sworn off. He smelled like soap in the evergreen tang of ambulance air. He had calluses at the base of his thumb. He had no cufflinks. "Good," she said, and when they stepped into the rain, the city washed her off like a bad memory. Early CTA after the big wedding block. If you love messy cinematic romances with sharp edges and soft centers, hit subscribe and stay for the rest of the story. They found an inexpensive motel with floral wallpaper and a door that locked without ceremony. It was not a palace, and it did not pretend to be. James offered her a toothbrush and a blanket folded neatly, like a man giving someone their dignity back in small, practical gestures. He told her to sleep and to let him take care of the bill. Emily watched him move through the motel room, the way someone learns the choreography of a strange household. He set the kettle on to boil, stacked the blanket on the foot of the bed, turned the television on low and then off without watching. His restlessness was not the arrogance of wealth, but the ache of someone who had seen people on the threshold of breakdown and wanted to know they would wake up. He slept on the armchair. She claimed the bed. They left the rules implicit. He would not assume anything she did not allow. She would not exploit the shelter he'd offered. Respect is a language, and they both spoke it like cautious travelers. That first night was awkward in a way that felt honest. There was the comedy of two people trying to create domestic norms on a mattress that creaked with every move. James slept with his boots by the door because his life required him to be ready. Emily unfolded the thrift store teacup she had tucked into her bag when she fled and kept it on the nightstand like an amulet. The teacup's faded floral design was a relic of the person she had promised to be. They shared the pillow space like two planets negotiating orbit. In the morning, James made coffee in the single-cup machine and boiled eggs with the kind of patience that felt like ritual. They ate in companionable silence. Emily found herself studying him. How his jaw tightened when he thought. The way he read names instead of faces. How small kindnesses, handing her the salt, wiping a spill, felt like a language of protection. "You're really an EMT?" Emily asked. She wanted to pin down the clean version of him before she suspected any glories. "Yeah." He shrugged modestly. "I've been with the district for 5 years. People call me when they fall apart. It beats being a corporate legal assistant, I guess." "Is it fulfilling?" Her question wasn't filler. She needed to know what kind of man would leave a life that might have been comfortable to do something that didn't buy status. "It keeps me honest," he said. "Keeps me honest about what's important. You learn that people are always worth the trouble." She nodded. She believed him. But the world is messy and rarely satisfied with a simple answer. The honeymoon was a cardboard box. Emily went home to the one place she recognized, the cafe she ran. She had not meant to be married forever, certainly not to a stranger from a wedding meltdown. The certificate in her drawer was surreal, folded like a secret. The first week felt like a collared shirt being buttoned by someone with clumsy fingers, warm edges, a wrong fit. Emily tried to resume her routines, staff schedules, inventory orders, the stubborn morning ritual of opening the cafe door at 6, while the city contented itself with noticing the newly married woman who wore thrift store finds to work like a badge of defiance. She told no one at the cafe about the county clerk, because there are confessions you make in the bathroom mirror, and others you keep to maintain structure. The staff knew she had been in an incident at a wedding, nothing more. They liked to believe their manager led a life of small dramas that did not involve billionaires. But the higher the social ladder you disturb, the louder the pushback. The pushback arrived in clipped texts, in the cutting smile of a woman who rented a chair at the nail salon, in an Instagram story that twisted her name into a hashtag of scorn. A neighbor's hurt look in an elevator became an indictment. Social media is a rumor mill that grinds personal life into public tinder. The first real shove happened over a manicure. Emily had scheduled a nail appointment the week after the wedding because it felt like a small way to reclaim her body, an act of normalcy in a life that had been yanked between a ceremony and the courthouse. She sat in a plush chair, feet up, watching a woman 2 stations over receive a manicure fit for a gala, the stylist's hands moving like choreography learned at an academy of wealth. "Isn't that Emily Carter?" the woman asked, like she had been handed a scandal on a tray. She held her phone out with a smirk. There was a photograph of Emily at the wedding, but the angle made it look like she had staged something. The salon filled with the tiny, prickly sounds of people leaning into a narrative that did not include her agency. "You should be ashamed," the stylist said, pointed and perfectly tuned to sting. "A woman who plays with hearts and then hides. What would your mother say?" Emily felt something go cold along her spine. She was tired of having her history turned into gossip like a costume she had to explain. She stood. "I'm not playing," she said. "Then what are you?" the woman spat. "A hanger-on waiting for someone to make you relevant." James stepped into the salon without sound, as if he had an internal GPS to cruelty and had taken the quickest route. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't produce a business card or a bank statement. He put a hand on Emily's shoulder and sat down beside her like a shield. "You'll excuse us," he said calmly. His tone cut through the salon like a clean knife. "We have to go." "You really shouldn't be seen with her," the stylist hissed. "Men like you shouldn't associate." James's jaw tightened, but he didn't deliver a public spectacle. He thanked the staff for their time and guided Emily toward the door. Once outside, he breathed in the cool air like someone making a promise to a person and to himself. To keep the response proportional, to protect without humiliating. There would be no humiliating counterattack from James. He had no appetite for mudslinging that made him sink into the mire. He defended her with quiet dignity, paying the salon for the appointment she was made to feel she didn't deserve, and dropping a tip that suggested gratitude rather than leverage. Small private gestures, nails done, a bag with a receipt from an upmarket boutique she hadn't entered, were the currency of his reparations. He wanted her dignity restored in ways that didn't make her feel like a charity case. Emily hated it. She hated how relieved she felt when her nails were perfect, as if that small beauty could clothe a bruised self. She hated how easy it was to accept kindness when survival demanded it. She told herself she would never let money define her, and yet the grip of social shaming loosened in 1,000 tiny increments because someone insisted on making the repairs. At the cafe, rumors became business. A regular stopped ordering his usual croissant. A supplier called to say they'd been contacted and asked whether Emily's personal life would affect their arrangements. Someone left a scathing Yelp review crafted to hurt. A story about entitlement where there had only been exhaustion. It stung because it suggested an origin story that painted her as a social climber instead of a woman running her life by grit and early mornings. James intervened again, this time with gestures that unsettled Emily. One afternoon she was mopping exclusively scrubbed tile when her manager neighbor, Pamela, burst into the cafe with tequila sour urgency and news that could have been a razor. Their lease was being reviewed. The landlord had received an offer from a boutique chain to double the rent. In the sanctity of day-to-day survival, double rent was apocalypse. For a small business like hers, it was a death sentence. "Don't call me except in an emergency," James said, voice steady. "I've got this." "No," Emily said sharply. "You don't. I don't want some billionaire picking up my problems because he's got an ugly streak of guilt." James's face showed the brief flicker of something like pain. "I'm not a billionaire," he said, making it a point. "I won't weaponize what I have. But some doors can be kept from closing without humiliation." They argued about it like two people trying to preserve ideals that bled into real life. He found a way to keep the cafe afloat for a while without making it an obvious rescue operation. He negotiated a counteroffer anonymously to the landlord, arranged for a quiet loan that came in the form of stock buyback, and had Neil quietly introduced as a potential investor to smooth things over. Nothing screamed of Walton money. Everything was done with the lightness of an invisible hand, but paradox is patient. The more he tried to avoid letting his means define the remedy, the more people sniffed money in the air. A neighbor who'd once been a friend grew jealous at the suggestion of support and began to whisper that Emily's marriage had become a business arrangement. Derek, sensing opportunity, escalated his campaign. He started leaving flowers at the cafe, deathly white lilies masquerading as contrition, and posting photos that framed him as the oh-so-wronged groom. Social media became a second wedding room, where the ceremony turned into an open case. An influencer posted a video of Emily buying coffee and titled it, "Bride for Hire." It turned her into a spectacle. Each incident carved a small notch into Emily's patience. She began to believe herself a character in a story she hadn't agreed to act in. She questioned whether she had been seen as anything beyond a convenient prop for Derek's revenge. Each time James wrapped a hand around the problem and eased it away, she recoiled from the implied inequality. "Don't let my life be fixed by someone else's pockets," she would say, and James would press his lips together as if holding back a confessional. James preferred small reparations to big gestures. He bought quality produce from local farmers for the cafe without announcing himself. He insisted the staff be paid early one month because bills don't wait for public opinion. He saved receipts for nothing but utility. No ostentation, no press release. His reluctance to be flashy was genuine. He wanted to be of service, not spectacle. But secrecy breeds suspicion. Where he thought the quiet would protect Emily, she felt patronized. At night, when the diner lights were turned off and the city's gossip subsided into low static, Emily would bring out the thrift store teacup and stare at the hairline crack in the porcelain. It was a small thing she had clung to since she was 16. It reminded her of a promise she had made not just to avoid billionaires, but to avoid everything that hid its teeth under a smile. She would cradle the cup and imagine its fractured pieces snugging back together, and sometimes, in the privacy of low light, she would allow herself to think that perhaps some people did not fit the pattern she had sworn to avoid. James, alone with the residues of his shifts, would fold towels and replay moments where he had cradled strangers and watched them unclench their fists slowly. He'd rescued a toddler from choking and later avoided the social whirl of his own family because saving lives in the field made the dinner table politics of a wealthy household feel irrelevant. He valued the tangible worth of a heartbeat in a chest over the intangible puffery of a name on a building. He had a reason for keeping parts of his life out of view. Not because he wanted to manipulate Emily, but because he was afraid that once she knew all of him, she would step back. He feared his family name would become a lens that covered the reality of what he did every day. That Walton might be an anchor dragging the very person he cared for into assumptions. He had seen people choose a different life if they suddenly realized the scale of the other's means. And his instinct was to protect the purity of the care he had offered, without transactional expectation. There were glimpses. Once, an accidental slip while clearing trash, Emily found a manila envelope with a business card inside reading Walton Group. It flew out of his messenger bag and skittered under the dumpster like a secret trying to hide in plain sight. She spotted it with a reflexive heart stab and slid it into her apron pocket without telling anyone, like a thief of truths. When she confronted him that night in the tiny kitchen behind the cafe, she kept her voice low. "Is Walton your family name?" He washed his hands as if trying to scrub away a thought. "Yes," he said. "But it's not what you think." "What am I supposed to think, James? That you moonlight as a paramedic because it's an affectation? Or that I sleep in the same bed as somebody whose family can buy the building my cafe sits on if they don't like the smell of my pastries? You're assuming a lot," he said. His fingers trembled. "You're assuming my family would behave like a headline. Is it your family pulling strings now? Are they buying my lease?" Her voice rose, thin with fear and anger. "No," he said quickly. "Mr. Walton would never intervene like that without—" He stopped. He chose his words as if balancing a fragile vase. "I don't want my name to turn your life into an object. I left that world because it didn't feel like mine. I choose this. Choosing to be present, to be useful. If my name changes how you feel, then I need to know that so I can be honest." Honesty. It hung between them like a window they both wanted to open. Emily felt the contradiction tug. This man had chosen the dirtier work. He had refused to be defined by a lineage she had sworn against, and yet his lineage sat like a rumor in her pocket. "Then tell me everything," she said. "Or at least tell me enough to trust that you're not using me as a rescue narrative." He looked at her as if reading a page written in a language he wasn't sure he could translate without losing meaning. "I left because I wanted to save lives," he said finally. "Not because of money, never because of money. But I understand why you would say what you said. I understand the hurt that puts up." He swallowed. "I promise I won't use my wealth to control you. If I do anything with money, it's to fix what was broken because you deserve your dignity, not because I want to buy you." She heard the promise. It didn't feel like charity, it felt like a pleading. It didn't erase the manila envelope in her pocket or the whispering voices in the salon. But it was an olive branch held by hands calloused from lifting the broken. She wanted to accept it, and then she didn't because acceptance felt like giving up a tiny sliver of herself. So she did what she knew best. She put on a brave face and kept secrets of her own. She filed the manila card away with the lid of the thrift store teacup like a coin under a pillow. She told herself she would find answers in time. Meanwhile, life didn't give them luxury of time. The public humiliation escalated in a montage that felt like a long, slow wave beating against a fragile cliff. A local lifestyle blogger wrote an article that framed Emily as a social climber who had snagged a public servant for her own curated image. The headline snagged like a hook. At a family luncheon, James's uncle had invited him with that casual malevolence some relatives have. Someone recognized Emily from the social media kerfuffle and let a comment flutter like acid. A neighbor's whisper in the hallway turned into a landlord's inquiry. The cafe's supplier sent a curt email asking if Emily's personal controversies would be a problem. Behind the scenes, James moved with the quiet decisiveness of a man who had learned how to extinguish small fires before they became infernos. He paid for extra security at the cafe for a month. He arranged for discreet PR damage control that framed the cafe as a community staple rather than a prize. When a television crew arrived one morning hoping for a scandal, Neil, who had become the staunchest and least showy ally, showed up with organized talking points and a demeanor that suggested the world made up of glued smiles did not need to be left to its own devices. Emily bristled at each rescue wrapped in anonymity. She resented the idea of being fixed like a broken vase. She resented being treated as if she couldn't sew her own fabric back together. She kept promising herself she would not be bought. Then came the small private moments that made separation impossible. One wet night, a delivery truck clipped a child's scooter near the cafe. A 2-year-old skidded across the pavement, eyes wide and arms like flailing birds. A downstream crowd of people turned into a chorus of paralysis. James ran out without pretense. Emily watched him kneel, check the child's reflexes, talk in the kind of soft, exacting sentences parents use when they need to calm a child into safety. The child's mother sobbed into her hands and thanked James as if he had sewn her heart back together. Emily felt an ache she couldn't label, something honest and hot and beyond every rumor. She began to see him in moments when he saved rather than soothed. A middle-aged man had collapsed in a grocery store, and James had been the first one there, hands moving with a competence that made you trust in the sanctity of immediate skill. Those seconds revealed the core of him, a man who measured worth in breath counts and the warmth of a pulse. Not a ledger. At the same time, little discoveries accumulated like brittle leaves. An expensive-looking scarf carelessly tossed over a chair in his apartment, a subtle accent in the way he handled his last name on the phone. Walton, softened to Dad, and back again. These were pebbles in a shoe that, if left unattended, made each step painful. Emily's chest tightened every time she found an item out of place, as if a puzzle had too many corners and she couldn't see the picture it made. The reveal came in pieces. Not with trumpets or tabloids, but with an accidental headline pinned under her cafe's order pad by a gust of wind. A free paper had been left on a table, the front page shouting about Walton Group's new charitable foundation, and a profile piece, and there, smaller, in a column about former CEO turned first responder, was a photograph of a man she recognized as hers. The caption read, in a neutral tone that felt like a blade, James Walton, ex-heir, has been seen volunteering with the city EMS for the past year. Her heart betrayed despite her efforts. She didn't explode. She simply closed the paper and felt the world divide into before and after. The manila envelope in her apron felt conspicuously lightweight, like a secret that had been a paperweight for too long. That night the cafe was quiet. The teacup sat on her nightstand, a small, stubborn relic. She knew what this meant. James had hidden a part of himself. He had omitted, for reasons he had claimed were noble. But omission is a kind of betrayal when one partner's identity becomes a lever for shame or suspicion. Emily lay awake trying to understand whether the thing she had sworn against had crept into her life through stealth or by accident. James didn't hide from the conversation. He sat at the tiny kitchen counter across from her and put his palms flat on the formica, as if setting his life out like a map. I should have told you, he said simply. She pulled the paper out from under the sugar jar and sat it between them like evidence. You said you were an EMT, she said. You didn't say you were Walton. I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid you'd look at me the way the world looks at people with money. Afraid you'd leave if you knew where I came from. I thought, stupidly, that I could build trust without the noise of a last name. That's not your decision to make, she said. You don't get to decide what parts of yourself render me acceptable. I get that now, he said. And I'm sorry. The apology wasn't a cure. Apologies are maps without direct routes. She had believed being deceived about his means would make the relationship less real, less authentic. Now she had to reconcile two truths: that he loved with a tenderness she had come to rely on, and that he'd hidden something that mattered. Why did you step away from it? She asked eventually, softer. From the Walton life. He leaned back on his chair and answered the way someone explains why a scar exists. I watched the people around me choose marriage as a business move, he said. I watched apologies purchased and then returned when convenient. I wanted to be the exact opposite. Being an EMT was a way to ground myself in something that felt purposeful, something I couldn't buy or sell. I didn't leave because I hated my family. I left because I needed to know what I would be without the name. She listened, and there were moments he said that sounded like truth and moments like self-preservation, both human. The room was small, and the teacup winked in the lamplight. She imagined him down on a street corner performing compressions. His sleeves rolled up, and that image made the Walton name flicker less like a brand and more like a stain he had tried to scrub away. "Why keep it from me?" she asked finally. "Wasn't honesty part of the bargain when we signed that piece of paper like two people running from other people's opinions?" His hands trembled when he lifted the cup. "I thought I could protect you from the way people with money become a target. Instead, I made you the target of a different thing. Secrecy. I'm sorry." They sat in the crossfire of mutual regret and real affection. Emily wanted the simplicity of righteous anger, but kept thinking of the child he had helped that afternoon, the parents who had sobbed under a streetlight because their world had almost gone dark. She had promised never to love a billionaire, but what she wanted, more than anything, was a man who didn't unravel under pressure and who could be present. James had been that man, yet trust, once frayed, needs more than promises. It needs explanation, restitution, time. She asked for space. He took it as a blow, but he honored it. He did not flood her with public declarations or buy headlines proclaiming his lineage and love. He did not weaponize his name against his enemies. He simply began to conduct his charity, as if repairing damage was the only kind of wealth he might ever truly care about. In the quiet that followed, Emily put the manila card back into its hiding spot and told herself she would make a decision when the fog cleared. It cleared, not with epiphany, but with escalation. Derek's campaign had not been a momentary tantrum. It was a strategy. He began dropping legal notices that hinted at intent, a suit against property use, whispers to suppliers to reconsider contracts. He wanted to see her fall so that he could be proven right, to show he had the power to end a life he had claimed ownership of. Something changed in James then. Not the man, but the depth of his resolve. He could have used his name as a battering ram. He could have humiliated Derek on a billboard and made a spectacle of the man who had tried to make Emily small. Instead, he marshaled quiet measures. He had Neil talk to the landlord. He arranged for a local charity foundation to support small businesses anonymously, and he had Pamela use her connections to secure a temporary reprieve from notice. Emily watched him move like someone used to using wealth responsibly. He never flaunted it. He never made a show. He repaired without making her feel indebted. But the repairs, however gentle, weighed on her like a collar she didn't ask to wear. One night, standing in the doorway of the cafe after everyone had left and the cooler humming sounded like a distant sea, Emily turned to James with the kind of honesty that does not soften for anyone. "I can't keep letting my life be shaped by other people's hands, James," she said. "Even yours." He nodded as if he had expected that. "I don't want to shape it," he said. "I want to support it." "Support and shaping can look the same," she said. He walked over and picked up her thrift store teacup, rolling it between his palms like a conversation. "If I have to give up every resource I have to earn your trust, I will," he said. "But I won't hide who I am anymore." "That's not what I'm asking for," she said. "I don't want you to erase yourself to make me comfortable. I want honesty. I want boundaries." The word felt like placing a lamp on a table and being grateful that it could be switched on. "I don't want to be someone's project. I promise," he said, voice gone small. "No projects, no rescues for show." A pause stretched between them, and in the pause was an unspoken problem. Promises can be made and broken. They can also be kept through the quiet work of everyday life. They both believed the work mattered. Then came the thing that made ambiguity impossible. A clipping left on the cafe counter the next morning. A photograph caught in a tabloid's eye showing James at a Walton charitable event 2 Christmases ago. Clear as glass, hand on a child, smile that said more than a single night in a motel could. Someone on social media recognized him and tagged the article with a string of comments that tacked his name to the family enterprise. Emily read the headline and felt her insides go hollow. She thought of the vow she had made to a life where no hands could buy her back. She thought of the teacup and of a life of hard work. She thought of how easily intentions could be twisted by context. She put her apron in the wash and walked out into the street. The city felt louder, the gossip sharper. At a crosswalk, a woman recognized her and smirked. A man on a bench coughed where laughter would have been. She walked until she found a stoop and sat, watching people move like a parade of futures. James found her there, as unhurried as a man who had found his compass. He sat without asking. Silence, at that hour, was a third party listening. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. His answer was the kind that required him to place his entire life on the table. "I was afraid you'd be someone else with me. I was afraid the promise you made to yourself would crumble because of a name. I wanted you to choose me for me. Did you ever imagine that in keeping that from me you might make me choose not to be with you?" Her voice was blunt. It had been carved by experience and sorrow. He looked at her with the rawness of a man exposing tendon. "Everything I did was to protect you," he said. "Not from myself, but from being reduced by my name. I didn't want my wealth to be used as an argument for everything I was." "And yet here we are," she said, because the world had a way of being tragically ironic. They sat in that contradiction for a long time, and then finally she said, "I don't want to be your charity version of happiness." He swallowed. "Then I won't make your happiness into an expense," he said. "I will be honest, and I will step back to let you build on your own terms. If that means you go, I will accept it." Her breath hitched, because he had not said he wouldn't fight, but he had said he wouldn't force. He had stepped away from the posture of a man about to use his wealth as vengeance. That restraint fascinated her. The night closed around them like a benevolent cloak. The teacup sat on the counter inside, small and stubborn, a piece of ceramic that had survived many hands. It was a symbol of the life she had made, and might yet make again on her own terms. She didn't walk away that night, but she also didn't promise anything. She had learned to hold space for chosen commitments, and to refuse bargains she hadn't negotiated. There was a distance, productive and painful, between them. She went home to her apartment and slept when she could, and James drove his ambulance through the dark, saving lives that would never know his name. The story was poised between what had happened and what might happen next. A name, a vow, a marriage signed in a... The story was poised between what had happened and what might happen next. A name, a vow, a marriage signed in a county office, and two people learning what it meant to mean something to one another under the public eye. The first formal blow came in an envelope that smelled faintly of cologne and law firm letterhead. The cafe manager, Pamela, handed it to Emily between the morning rush and a delivery of croissants. Derek's name sat at the top like an accusation. Inside was a terse demand to vacate a patio space the landlord claimed Emily had been using improperly. It read like a threat dressed in civility. Correct the violation within 10 days or face legal consequences. The landlord's note that followed, scrawled in ink that suggested discomfort rather than malice, made the offer clear: accept a higher rent from a corporate client, or accept the notice. Emily folded the paper and set it on the counter as if it were already a small weight she could manage. She moved through the morning with the economy of someone who had practiced recovery. Take orders, tamp espresso, smile in place of explanation. Still, the notice rang like a bell in her skull. Derek's campaign had never been merely about humiliation. It was about removing any place she called home. James heard about the notice before noon. He arrived without fanfare, not a convoy, not a press statement, just a man in a jacket, carrying 2 insulated containers of soup because Pamela had said someone might need lunch. He asked to see the notice, read it with a calm focus, then asked the landlord politely for a meeting. The landlord, who chewed his words like a nervous man, was flattered by attention and quietly reassured with an offer James made as himself, not as an announcement. A temporary lease arrangement under a different anonymized account that would give Emily time. "It will buy you months," James told Emily later, handing her a slip of paper with an account number and an arrangement that made the landlord look like a hero. "I don't want to be the woman kept afloat by a secret safety net," Emily said, shoulders tight. "You won't be," he replied. "You are a competent, stubborn person. I am not trying to buy your independence. I'm trying to grant it breathing room. But breathing room comes with the smell of someone else's hand on the switch. Rumors multiplied. Food bloggers speculated about a secret investor. The landlord's mention of connections found its way into a local post. Derek smiled for a camera like a man whose conscience had been engaged in the black art of revenge. Every small kindness James could give was reframed by the public as a transaction. When the staff at the cafe began to mutter about whether customers left because of her personal life, Emily felt the old reflex of going back into the world alone. She had built her boundaries by refusing the handouts that came with strings. This felt like the same net, even if the knot was gentler. "Let me handle this, Emily," James said one night when the cafe had closed and the light over the pastry case threw small, forgiving halos across croissants. "I'll talk to Derek. I'll tell him to stop. I can make it stop." "No," she said, voice hard. "I don't want you to fight a war I'm supposed to fight myself. I don't want your name to become a reason people listen to my problems instead of me." He listened, the set of his jaw tightening. For the first time, she saw a flicker of an old life in him. Someone who had spent afternoons negotiating power in rooms that smelled of varnish and polite hurt. "If you want me to step away entirely," he began. "I want you to stop signing checks on my behalf without asking," she said. "I would rather be resourceful and survive than be kept alive by someone else's pity." He swallowed. The quiet between them began to acquire a kind of gravity. He hadn't wanted his resources to be a weapon. He had wanted them to be a cushion. But a cushion can feel like a shroud. Their argument that evening was not theatrical. It was quiet, honest, a kind of two-handed tug at the fabric of what they had become. James's fear that the Walton name would swallow Emily's autonomy sat across from her fear that wealth would provide fixes where dignity should be allowed to grow. He promised transparency. She promised to accept help when she'd asked for it. The promise held for a week. Then Derek reopened the campaign in a way that shifted from petty to damaging. A supplier called saying they'd received an embellished rumor about unpaid invoices and hinted at a preference to withdraw. A local influencer posted a video, half mocking and half hungry for drama, that stitched clips of Emily into an unsatisfying narrative. The cafe's regulars thinned out. A check bounced that had nothing to do with the business's health and everything to do with the psychology of perception. Emily found herself sitting at the back table, twining the teacup's handle with fingers that felt like they belonged to someone else. "I can't keep doing this," she said to James. "I can't keep being the target of someone's game." He placed his hand over hers, the contact deliberate and non-invasive. "Then let's do something called honest confrontation," he said. "Not with publicity or lawyers, just a sit-down. I'll bring the receipts, you bring the truth. Let's end whatever game Derek is trying to play." She wanted to be the woman who replied with her own claws, who filed countersuits and called reporters. But the life she'd lived taught her that power has a smell, and often it's the oppressed who can't afford to bring the same stench into their daily routines. She nodded, exhausted. The meeting with Derek was small and private, which, compared to a public spectacle, felt like an admonition. Derek arrived in precise clothes and precise anger. He recited grievances like a practiced speechwriter. "You were supposed to be the person I married, Emily," he said. "Instead, you made it a joke. You used me. You used my friends. You used me the way you thought you could that day in the hotel," Emily said, the words coming out clipped. "You orchestrated humiliation. You didn't want a wedding. Just a public execution." Derek's face hardened. "I wanted the truth out," he said. "Not whatever circus you staged." James didn't need to intercede, but he did. He did not pull out a ledger or throw it in Derek's face. He spoke with the kind of measured authority that didn't need press. "If your goal is to harm Emily, you'll find I don't cooperate with cruelty." Derek sneered. "You have a lot of gall for someone who hides behind a badge." James felt that flicker, the tightness in his chest that remembered boardrooms and the weight of a name. He could have made Derek's life a public shaming. He could have arranged a leak that would ruin Derek's social invitations and career prospects. He could have used the Walton machine to grind Derek down with financial and reputational pressure. The easier path was retaliation. It would have been legal, perhaps, Social weapons can be deployed without breaking the law. They only break spirits. James thought of the family he had left for doing precisely that kind of campaign, bankrolling revenge until the consequence was a marriage destroyed. He would not be that man. Instead, James sat and listened. He told Derek he would support Emily in practical ways, and he offered to help Derek see the harm he'd done, if Derek was willing to accept mediation. Derek refused. The man who had wanted spectacle still. He wasn't satisfied with private admissions or dignified ends. He wanted a public brand of retribution. After Derek stormed out, Emily closed the door and let the silence fill the room like an exhale. "I don't want to keep fighting him," she said. "I don't want the cafe to be ground down because of his need to prove something." "Then let's insulate it," James said. "Let Neil take a stake. Let us approach this like a puzzle, not a war. Small measures, quiet enforcement. We will not weaponize anything against him. We'll simply protect what you've built." Neil, when James suggested it, did not make a grand entrance. He came that afternoon with a checkbook and a look that suggested he had been waiting a long time to do the right thing for someone he admired. He bought a minority stake in the cafe, the sort of investment that kept the lights on without turning the place into a boardroom. He did it without fanfare, insisting on anonymity for the reasons Emily named, so no headline could carry a story of rescue and shame. "It'll give you breathing room," Neil said, folding his hands like a man who'd learned how to make help feel like respect. Emily accepted, though it felt like she had swallowed a bitter herb. The cafe stayed open, staff payrolls were kept steady, suppliers returned calls. The day-to-day survived. The public campaigns cooled. Derek, for all his fury, had lost the gleam of momentum. For a time, things were stable enough to be ordinary. The most dangerous kind of blessing for someone who'd been learning that ordinary was possible. They returned to making decisions together, working out where the side of the bed was, who would fill the blank spaces left by institutional absence. James came by when he could between shifts. Emily taught him which pastries were safe to frost and which required an artist's touch. He taught her how to tie a compression band in a way that kept it from slipping. Still, the quiet ticked with the tension of unspoken things. Emily thought often about the envelope in her apron pocket, the manila card with the Walton Group business card tucked inside it like a flintstone. She had not shown it to anyone. That omission sat like an open scar. One evening in late spring, after they'd closed and the cafe felt like a box of warm light, James set a small wrapped box on the counter. Emily eyed it with caution. Inside was nothing extravagant. A simple silver ring, not the ostentation of a Walton heir, but something like a promise made low and private. "I can't ask you to stay because of a ring," he said, reading her face. "I put it in this box because I want you to know I'm not proposing to buy your consent. I propose this: honest partnership. If you don't want it, this ring can be returned. I won't use it as leverage." "It feels like a trap," she said. "You've said you won't make my life into a problem that your money solves." "It is not a trap," he said. "It is an invitation." She turned the ring over. It was small and plain and heavy enough to register as real in her palm. "I need time," she said. He folded his hands on the counter and honored that. He had learned, slowly, imperfectly, that respecting her autonomy meant accepting her rhythm. Time, though, carved pressure into the space between them. Public attention died down, but private considerations rose. Emily's sleep became more restless. She dreamed of a life in which she owned the cafe free of worry. She yearned for the day she could advertise a pastry without attaching an explanation. For customers who came because the mousse was good, not because they wanted to gawk at a married-to spectacle. Then an event happened that shifted everything like an outside hand rearranging chessmen on a board. A local paper ran a feature on community heroes, and, tucked into a photo credit, identified James Walton, no longer just James, as belonging to the Walton family. The article painted a picture of his past involvement in the city's charitable events and briefly mentioned his withdrawal from the family business. It was respectful, not salacious. The piece was about life choices, not gossip. Emily read the article at noon, alone with a plate of toast and a cup of coffee that had gone cold. Her stomach flipped in a way she couldn't name. She looked at James and saw the truth of the man reflected there, a complex map of choices, fear, and generosity. But inexplicably, the discovery didn't feel like the last straw. It felt like an admission. He had chosen the life he had told her about. The deception wasn't malice, it was a quiet tactic, fear-based and selfish in its smallness, but not cruel. She asked him to meet her at the motel where they'd slept the first night. They sat at the small table, a little window open, the late sunlight painting the floral wallpaper in streaked gold. "I need to know," she said simply. "If this had been different, if Derek had left me alone, would you have told me on your own?" He looked at the table, fingers tracing the wood as if reading a line in a book. "I think I would have," he said. "But I am not sure. Fear made me small. It made me hope I could keep you and your choices intact by not bringing everything into the open. I thought I could protect you that way. Protection by omission is still deception," she said. "You should have trusted me with your truth, James." He nodded. "You are right." She breathed, a sound that was half relief and half grief. "I don't want to make this decision for reasons I won't recognize. I won't let myself be a prize or a project." "I never tried to make you that," he said. "I ruined that by hiding. I won't try to fix it with money." They sat with that. Then Emily stood and crossed to the window, looking down at the street where people moved like some slow current. For the first time since the wedding, she thought in a future tense for herself alone. She thought of the little life she could create for the cafe, the possibility of expanding to a small second location, the pride in earning every uncomfortable cent. But she also thought of the man who had kept people alive, who had given her room to breathe in the first place. "I want a divorce," she said finally. It was not a tantrum. It was an act of clarity. She wanted a clean start on terms she defined. She had been married in a moment of chaos, but that didn't mean she was obligated to remain tethered to a man whose secrets had become a foreign country in her life. James's face folded in a way that made such pain visible. He had expected resistance, but not the formal severing. "If that's what you want," he said. His voice was a flat sound that could have been broken glass. "I will honor it." They did not litigate this publicly. Emily insisted on a quiet separation, papers signed, an arrangement for the apartment and the ring to be returned, a division of responsibilities that respected the life they had shared. She moved back into the apartment above the cafe with a new key and a resolve that tasted of iron. James stayed in his spare room a few blocks away, not because the law required it, but because he felt it. For weeks the separation was a hollow echo in both their days. They crossed paths at the cafe, businesslike and careful, the way two people who had once been intimate managed the new geography of neutrality. The ring sat in a drawer at James's place like an apology too late. He filled his shifts with the work he loved and let the repetition of saving lives be a lodestar that steadied him. But absence has a way of clarifying. For Emily, solitude uncovered the scaffolding of what had happened. The little kindnesses that had saved her dignity, and the omissions that had cut at trust. For James, the divorce forced a confrontation with a deeper truth, that protecting someone by withholding the fullness of oneself had been an act of fear, not love. He had been trying to preserve her from the consequences of his name, but in the process, he had excluded her from his real life. It was Neil who suggested a way back that did not involve weaponry or theatrics. "People need to see why you're good," Neil said one afternoon while repairing the back fence that kept pigeons out of the kitchen yard. "Not because you're rich or famous. They need to see your work, the things you do. Let them watch you be who you are." James took the advice almost literally. He began a small project that looked like nothing more than kindness. He negotiated discreetly, without headlines, to restore the patio lease under Emily's name. He arranged for a local architect to help redesign the back room into a community classroom where Emily could run morning pastry lessons for teenagers looking for work skills. He paid for the materials anonymously, through Neil, making sure Emily could claim these projects as her own. When Emily discovered it, she was furious. "You didn't clear it with me," she said. This is precisely what I told you not to do. I know, he admitted. But sometimes the things you told me you wanted, space to grow, resources to make that growth possible, didn't happen because you were always putting out fires. I thought I'd help in a way that made the work yours. Help doesn't need to be sneaky, she said. It needs to be offered and accepted. He held out his hands. I won't hide again. I thought I could fix everything privately because I didn't want my name to be a presence in your life. That was wrong. If you'll let me help, I will do it out in the open. I'll stand beside your work and let people see both of us without making you a problem to solve. Emily absorbed that. Trust, she had learned, was not restored by annulling the past. It was restored by changes in behavior and evidence over time. James had been presented with a moral fork before. Now he had chosen a path that demanded patience and humility rather than spectacle. Slowly, nearly imperceptibly, the town's tone shifted. The classes in the community room filled. Teens learned how to perfect a glaze and how to greet customers. Parents began bringing their kids to the cafe. Customers returned, not because of any social media storm, but because the coffee and pastries were good, and because someone in town remembered the kindness she'd offered when the bakery had a charity drive. The narrative that had twisted Emily into a caricature loosened. Still, something else was forming beneath the daily repairs, a small private thread that led back to intimacy. It began with shared dinners in the kitchen, no ceremonies, just a pan of roasted vegetables between two people. It grew with shared silences and the steady, ordinary reminders of being known. Him remembering the way she liked her tea, her noticing how he read the traction number on a broken train so he could help a stranger. The teacup returned to the nightstand carefully cleaned, less an amulet of vows and more a talisman of survival. One evening, James came to the cafe with a small stack of envelopes. He asked to speak with Emily after closing. When they sat alone, he placed a folded sheet of paper between them. It was a letter. Not a proclamation, but a confession. I wrote this because my voice hasn't been good at telling you everything I mean without trying to fix it, he said. Read it if you want. She read, and the paper told a story in measured lines, about his father and the dinners where value was discussed like a commodity, about a moment when he realized that being born to a name didn't mean you had to be owned by it, about the night he'd chosen EMT shifts over a corner office, about the guilt that had made him conceal the truth, and above all, it described the small ways he'd loved her, paying for the cafe's bills when desperate, buying Neil's steak to keep it afloat, standing by her in front of the salon. When she finished, her eyes were wet but not dramatic. Why didn't you just give me this before? She asked. Because I thought I could show you instead of saying it, he said. That was arrogant. She laughed softly, a sound like a softened bell. You weren't wrong to try to show me. You were wrong to think action could replace words. I'll say the words now, he said. I love you. Not the idea of you or as an episode in someone else's story, but you. I will not use my money to control you. I will not hide pieces of myself from you. I will ask, not assume. I will be patient. If you still want that divorce, I will respect it. But if there's a chance you might want to be here by choice, I'll make it my work every day to be worthy of that choice. Emily looked up. Outside, someone put the sign on the cafe to open for the morning. A truck hummed by. She thought of vows she had made in thrift store kitchens and of the person she had promised to be. She thought of the man who had done what he could to keep her safe without wanting credit. I don't know if I can say yes, she admitted. Not yet. Then don't, he said. Say take your time. Stay for dinner tonight. Stay for next Tuesday's pastry class. Take all the time you need. She smiled, the kind that was relieved of contrived poise. Okay, she said. They began slowly to rebuild. Not in a rush toward a public ceremony, but in deliberate steps that felt earned. James attended a pastry class as an awkward student, covered in flour, and Emily taught him how to fold dough. They laughed together at his clumsy attempts. Neil teased them both. Pamela brought extra cinnamon rolls on days when the town felt like it needed sweets. There was still work to be done, forgiveness, reestablishing trust, persuading a community that didn't care to change its mind easily. But the moments multiplied like currency. James sitting through a staff meeting without dominating it, asking questions and taking directions. Emily allowing him to sign for the patio work in the contractor's contract and being present when the workers painted the new mural that celebrated local growers. They learned to negotiate about money openly, to write checks together and to decide when a purchase was prudent or patronizing. Where James had once thought anonymity was protection, he now saw that transparency built containment and trust. One afternoon, months after the courthouse certificate had been folded into their lives, Emily missed her period. It was no dramatic moment, just a small tilt in the familiar rhythm. She bought a test with her own money and returned to the back room to take it alone, the teacup warm in her hands, her skin prickling. The test was a single delicate line that shifted from void to meaning. She placed the test on the counter and sat down as if the room had suddenly been rearranged. When James came by that evening, a neighborhood run, a sandwich in hand, she didn't hide anything. She put the test in front of him and let him read it. He didn't shout. He didn't break into the towering gestures he might have made if he'd been a different sort of man. He simply sat, his face an open page, then took her hand and breathed as if the air itself were a tiny miracle. "Is this?" he began. "It looks like it," she said. "I don't know what I want to do with that yet." "Whatever you want," he answered. "Whatever you decide, I will be here. I will not declare it a victory or a possession. I will be present." They did not change the world in a day. They did not stage a public announcement. They allowed the possibility to become a reality in small, tender ways. Doctor's appointments held in hushed confidence, James attending as an unshowy presence, the two of them talking late into nights about the kind of parents they might be. He helped her assemble a small corner of the cafe with baby-safe items and reference books, while she taught the regulars how to tip more generously to staff who covered overnight shifts. Mr. Walton, when the news eventually reached him, arrived with the kind of caution only long habit teaches. He was not cinematic. He did not command a fleet or issue a statement. He walked into the cafe on a Tuesday when the morning rush was buzzing, and his presence was a ripple, not a wave. He looked at Emily with a studied, almost surprised softness. "I hear congratulations are in order," he said to her quietly. Emily, who had spent a lifetime learning to meet that kind of attention with armor, found herself answering with the frankness that had become her habit. "Thank you. We are figuring it out." Mr. Walton nodded like a man accustomed to deals and now offered a different currency, acceptance. He spoke to James privately and said what James had needed for so long, an almost ordinary statement of pride. "I made mistakes with how I taught my children to value power," he told his son. "Maybe you did what you thought you had to in order to find yourself. That's on me. If you're happy, then at least that's a thing I did right." It was not a full absolution. It was not a return to any gilded past. But it was enough. The patriarch's quiet blessing, no press conference, no headline bought in apology or advertisement. It allowed Emily to see that the world did not have to be an adversary to their possibility. They did not marry again in ceremony. There was no need to repeat a paperwork script that had begun as an escape. Instead, one evening when the cafe had closed and the kitchen lights were dim, James took Emily's hands and slid the small silver ring back onto her finger. He had replaced it, not as a purchase or as a legal maneuver, but as an offering of accountability, a simpler, hand-fashioned band that fit her like a promise rather than a brand. "I woke up married to you once," he said quietly. "I don't want you to wake up married to an image ever again. I want you awake beside a man who tells you the truth." Emily looked at the ring and then at him. The teacup sat on the shelf like a tiny monument. Outside, a town breathed and customers walked home with the comfort of pastry. Inside their small world, two people had chosen to become a family on terms they had built together. Months later, a small announcement appeared in the town paper. It wasn't positioned for spectacle. It read like a note from two people to their neighbors. "Emily Carter and James Walton are expecting. They ask that privacy be respected. Donations may be made to the cafe's youth program." People smiled and left bouquets for the staff. The story circulated, but the tone had shifted from mockery to genuine community warmth. When the baby arrived, Not in a flash of spectacle, but in the quiet rush of midnight and practiced hands, Emily held a small life that was theirs in a way only parenting can make things feel. James, who had learned to weigh wealth not as entitlement but as stewardship, took paternity leave without a press release and spent long days changing diapers and making nurses coffee in the break room. He called his father sometimes, and for the first time, their conversations were about diapers and small fears, about the future James hoped to offer that was not about influence but about presence. At the cafe, the teacup was mounted on a small shelf behind the counter, not as a relic but as a reminder. Customers often asked about it, and Emily would tell the short version, about promises and the complexity of keeping them. She never made it a parable about wealth. She talked about choices, the dignity of labor, and how a community can hold someone when they fall. Derek, who had once been a blustering force of spectacle, found his own undoing in quieter ways. The social circles he cultivated recoiled at his cruelty. The boutique client he coveted found an odd scandal unrelated to Emily and withdrew. Retribution, where it came, arrived through time and social consequence rather than a headline orchestrated by a Walton trust. Justice, in this small town, smelled more like people turning away from meanness than like a gavel. Life, for Emily and James, settled into an honest rhythm that did not rewrite the past but reframed it. Emily still insisted on making major cafe decisions. James still checked in on staff payrolls and asked, "Did you file the permits?" like an involved but not controlling partner. They argued and made up in equal measure. They created rituals, a Saturday morning coffee run in which they took turns making each other's drinks exactly as they liked, an annual dinner where they wrote down things they wished to do that year that didn't involve saving one another. On the baby's first birthday, the cafe hosted a small celebration. Neighbors brought cupcakes. Neil brought a crooked balloon sculpture. Mr. Walton arrived with a wrapped package and a look like a man who had finally learned how to say, "I'm proud," without pretense. He hugged Emily briefly, and the gesture felt like reconciliation extended beyond one household. Emily looked at her child in the high chair, a small face already practicing expressions, and felt a kind of astonished gratitude. She had once sworn never to love a billionaire, not as a snobbery but as a vow to protect herself from being reduced. She had woken up married to one by accident. She had been hurt by omission and found her dignity threatened. She had demanded boundaries and reasserted her agency. Through all of that, she had discovered something she hadn't anticipated: that love can be messy and honest, that wealth doesn't have to be weapons, and that a promise given to oneself can evolve into a life made by both hands, not purchased. James watched her with a tenderness that had been tempered by hard lessons. He slipped a small new band onto her finger that matched the plainness of the first he'd offered in the cafe months before. "For the days when we forget to say thank you," he whispered. She smiled, and the teacup gleamed behind the counter, a little chipped and perfectly whole in its imperfection. The cafe sign swung gently in the late afternoon breeze, and for once the town seemed to be breathing with them, less concerned with statures and more invested in the people who made mornings warm. If someone were to ask Emily whether she had kept her vow to never love a billionaire, she'd laugh now in a way that wasn't scornful. "I kept a promise to myself," she'd say. But promises can be rewritten when the one standing in front of you refuses to be an idea, and instead insists on being flesh and flawed, present and honest. Outside, the city moved on in its impatient ways. Inside, a woman who had promised herself independence cradled a child and held onto a love that had been reluctant, complicated, and ultimately chosen by both. The world had not been fixed by money. It had been pieced together by countless acts of attention, by small repairs, by apologies paid in time, by the steady work of two people building what they valued. If you rooted for them, if their messy, careful reconciliation pulled something soft in your chest, leave a like, share this story with someone who loves a tender redemption, and subscribe for more slow-burning romances that honor the grit it takes to mean something to another person.